welcome once again to the garden path, or as a good friend of mine suggested, perhaps a garden puddle. Certainly the weather has made some differences in how the garden looks this year from in previous years. I'll be able to point out slug damage, which I'm sure everyone has, and some of my plants have actually rotted. The flowers have rotted before they opened, and it's a little discouraging, but that being said, other plants really appreciate the water. This week we're going to talk about wild plants, some of which are native and some that aren't, and how I grow them. My wildflower garden and the pond, the little tiny pond, are interrelated in the way I garden. Water, when it rains, comes off the roof, runs down the drain pipe, underneath a pipe in the ground, into the pond, which fills that up. Then the overflow takes the water from the pond and weaves through the garden, watering underground. So the plants are getting water from the rain above and also some water coming from underneath, and then eventually it goes out into the gully. The frog's eggs that we mentioned in an earlier episode have hatched, and the dad was sitting by the pond. He's not a proud dad because he couldn't care less, but the little tadpoles are clinging to the stems of the water lilies and some of the leaves, and they're only a few days old. I want to say before I go any farther about lady slippers and many of our wild plants, you shouldn't dig them in the wild because they do not survive and you're only depleting the environment. So if you want wildflowers that are native, it's best to buy them at a nursery, and there are nurseries that provide them. These little guys are all anemones. One of the strongest and easiest ones to grow is called the wood anemone, Anemone sylvestris. This plant, which is, I would say maybe 10 years old, is one of the rhododendrons I bought from Captain Steele, and it's a native to Japan. It's called Rhododendron Keskii, and I'm very, very fond of it. It seems very happy there, and I'm certainly happy to have it. In this corner, hidden in the bottom, you'll find a multitude of small spotted leaves, and those are our native dogtooth violet. And they spread like crazy, but just as in nature in Canada, there are very few blooms. I have them because I like them and maybe someday they'll bloom, but as impatient as I am, I went out and bought this dogtooth violet, which is a hybrid, but very similar flowers, and it's called Pagoda. Directly in front of me are some native jack-in-the-pulpits, and they will be open in a few days, fully open in a few days, but they're coming up nicely now. And in front of them are ferns that aren't fiddleheads. They look like fiddleheads, but this is actually cinnamon fern. And that's one thing you can transplant in Nova Scotia. These are ostrich ferns, which are a fiddlehead fern, and you can eat the fiddleheads. They're just beginning to spread. I've only had them for about 3 years, so I'm going to wait for another 2 or 3 years before I start harvesting fiddleheads, but eventually they'll fill in this area. Over in the corner, in front of the Pagoda dogtooth violets, is a small plant with a strange looking leaf that's called bloodroot. I have some Canadian ginger, and this has an odd little flower. It's sort of brownish and has 3 lobes. Now the roots of these you can actually cut and cook for about 40 minutes. Then in a thick sugar syrup, you can cook them a little longer, maybe 15 minutes, and dry them and make a candied ginger. Here I have a collection of trilliums. This is the common white trillium that's frequently found in Ontario and some here. I have some other trilliums that I bought at various greenhouses, and this one's called luteum. Behind me is Magnolia stellata. It's a young plant, so it will get better and bigger, and almost everyone I know has Magnolia stellata in their gardens. It's quite common, but still lovely. And this also is common, but will always be one of my favorites, and this is Magnolia solangiana, and I have childhood memories that I'll never forget of seeing it the first time I saw it, and I'm still thrilled to have it in my garden. Lloyd has taken species to a different level. He's growing a very interesting group of rhododendrons that he's going to tell you about a little later.
Here we have behind me some rhododendrons. Some of them I started from seed. They're rhododendrons that we found when we lived in South Korea for a while, and we just could not believe the number and the sides of the hills that would be covered by these rhododendrons. In the foreground, there are some of the old standards because we've had them for a long time. There's a bright red one there, and when it blooms, it's almost scarlet. But it's not really part of the rhododendron stuff. The rhododendron stuff is on this north slope behind me here. So it does quite well here. It's got good drainage, and you can see that some of them, that big, a tall one back there is really only 3 years old since I planted it there. So it's doing quite well. They're one of the first ones out, and they were blooming about 3 weeks ago. Thanks for visiting us again, and we'll see you again maybe next week.